The moment Grant Holloway walked into the quiet downtown cafe and saw the woman waiting at his blind date, the air seemed to leave his lungs. 3 days earlier, that same woman had looked him in the eyes across a glass conference table and ended his 7-year career with a single signature. Now she was sitting across from him, hands folded beside a cup of untouched coffee, wearing the same calm expression that had haunted him ever since he lost his job. Her name was Celeste Whitmore, the CEO of the company that had fired him. And she had no idea that the nervous single father walking toward her had spent the last 3 days wondering how he would tell his 8-year-old daughter that sometimes good people lost everything without doing anything wrong. If you believe that kindness can survive betrayal, that forgiveness can heal wounds, and that people deserve second chances, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so our family can keep sharing stories that remind us that one painful moment does not have to define an entire life. Grant almost turned around. He had been persuaded to come to the blind date by his older sister, Meredith, who had spent weeks reminding him that being a father did not mean he had to stop being a man with dreams, feelings, and a future. Grant had laughed when she suggested it, telling her that his life was already complicated enough. He was raising his daughter, Elsie, alone after losing his wife to an illness 4 years earlier, and lately every dollar had been carefully measured. But after being fired from Whitmore Systems, even careful budgeting had become frightening. The severance money would not last long, the mortgage payment was approaching, and Elsie's school had already sent home a reminder about an upcoming field trip fee. Grant had spent the morning pretending everything was fine while making his daughter breakfast, packing her lunch, and promising her that he would find another job soon. She had believed him without hesitation. Children sometimes trusted the promises adults were most afraid they could not keep. Celeste looked up when Grant approached the table, and the shock on her face was almost as strong as his own. She recognized him immediately. Grant had been one of the company's most dependable project managers, the kind of employee who arrived early, stayed late, and never took credit for solving problems that others could not. But 3 days earlier, Celeste had signed the termination papers after an internal investigation showed that a confidential financial file had been accessed through Grant's employee credentials. The board had demanded immediate action because a major investor had threatened to withdraw millions of dollars. Celeste had not personally investigated the evidence. She had trusted the report placed before her, trusted the executives who told her Grant was responsible, and made what she believed was the only decision that could protect the company. Grant had pleaded his innocence, but she had remained firm. She remembered the disappointment in his face more than anything else. He had not shouted. He had simply gathered his things, looked at her for several seconds, and walked away. Now he sat across from her, and neither knew what to do with the absurdity of the situation. The blind date had been arranged by a mutual friend who apparently knew neither of them had any connection to the other. Celeste finally realized that Grant's presence was not an accident, and Grant realized she had come without knowing who would be sitting across from her. For several uncomfortable minutes, they spoke about ordinary things, but every sentence carried the weight of what had happened. Grant mentioned that he had a daughter. Celeste quietly admitted that she had no children and had spent most of her adult life building her career. When Grant asked what she did for work, he almost smiled at the cruelty of the question. Celeste answered honestly that she was the chief executive of Whitmore Systems. Grant looked down at his coffee, and something inside Celeste tightened. She could have left. He could have left. Instead, they stayed. What neither of them knew was that the blind date would become the beginning of a truth that could destroy Celeste's position and restore Grant's future. During their conversation, Celeste noticed something strange. Grant was not bitter. He was hurt, deeply hurt, but there was no satisfaction in watching her uncomfortable. When she carefully apologized for the circumstances surrounding his termination, Grant told her that apologies mattered only when they were followed by action. He explained that losing his job had frightened him less than watching his daughter notice that he was worried. He described how Elsie had placed her small piggy bank on the kitchen counter that morning and told him he could use her savings if he needed them. That was the moment Grant had nearly broken down. His daughter was only 8, yet she already understood that love sometimes meant giving away the little you had. Celeste listened quietly. Something about the story unsettled her because Grant was not asking her for sympathy. He was simply telling the truth. She began wondering whether the investigation had really been as solid as she had believed. After the date ended, there was no romance between them, no sudden magical transformation. There was only an uncomfortable understanding that something unfinished existed between them. Celeste returned to the office before noon and requested the complete investigation file. What she found changed everything. The confidential financial document had been accessed from Grant's credentials at 2:17 in the afternoon on the day in question. The report stated that Grant had been physically present in the building and had used his workstation. But when Celeste examined the security records, she noticed that Grant had actually left the building nearly an hour earlier to pick up his daughter from school after she had become sick. The report had mentioned his departure but dismissed it because his employee account remained active. Then Celeste discovered that the security camera covering Grant's hallway had been mysteriously disabled for 12 minutes. She asked the technology department for access logs, and a second problem appeared. Someone had used an administrative override to access Grant's account remotely. Celeste's hands became cold. She kept digging. The person who had authorized the override was Preston Vale, the company's chief financial officer, a man who had personally urged Celeste to fire Grant quickly. Preston had been with the company for 11 years and had always presented himself as loyal, disciplined, and fiercely protective of the company's interests. But the deeper Celeste looked, the more inconsistencies she found. Several financial transfers connected to the leaked document led to an outside consulting firm secretly controlled by Preston's brother. Grant had unknowingly discovered irregularities in those transfers weeks earlier and had prepared a report that could have exposed them. Suddenly, Grant's firing no longer looked like an unfortunate mistake. It looked planned. Celeste called an emergency board meeting, but before she could present everything, Preston walked into her office and accused her of creating unnecessary chaos. He warned her that reversing Grant's termination would damage the company's credibility and suggested she was allowing personal feelings to cloud her judgment. For the first time since becoming CEO, Celeste refused to be intimidated. She told him that credibility did not mean protecting a convenient lie. It meant having the courage to admit when the truth had been ignored. By early afternoon, the board reviewed the evidence. Preston was suspended pending a formal investigation, and outside auditors were brought in. The company discovered that Grant had not only been innocent but had been trying to expose the very financial misconduct that had nearly caused the crisis. His termination had been part of an elaborate attempt to silence him and make him appear responsible for the breach. Celeste drove to Grant's home that afternoon, but she did not expect forgiveness. She found him in the driveway helping Elsie repair the loose chain on an old bicycle. When Grant saw her, his expression became guarded. Celeste did not arrive with corporate lawyers, excuses, or a carefully prepared speech. She simply told him the truth. She admitted that she had failed him. She had trusted a report instead of trusting a man who had spent 7 years proving his character. She had chosen speed over fairness because she was afraid of losing control. And although the investigation had cleared his name, she knew that restoring his job could never restore the days she had taken from him. Grant listened while Elsie watched from a few feet away. Celeste expected anger, but Grant's response was quieter. He told her that he had spent 3 days wondering whether he had somehow failed as a father because he could not protect his daughter from financial uncertainty. He said the worst part had not been losing his salary. It had been feeling disposable after giving years of his life to people he believed in. Celeste admitted that she had been wrong. Grant did not immediately forgive her. And that was okay. Forgiveness, he realized, did not have to mean pretending the pain had never happened. Celeste offered Grant his position back, along with compensation for the lost wages and a formal public statement clearing his name. Grant thanked her but did not accept immediately. Instead, He asked whether she would change the company's investigation policies so that no employee could ever again be dismissed solely on evidence that had not been independently verified. Celeste promised that she would. Grant finally agreed to return, but not because he needed revenge or because the salary was attractive. He returned because he believed the company could become something better than what it had been. Weeks passed, and the atmosphere inside Whitmore Systems changed. Celeste became less interested in being the person with every answer and more interested in becoming the person willing to listen. Grant returned to work with renewed confidence, and the board eventually promoted him to a senior position overseeing internal project integrity. Preston's misconduct was formally confirmed, and the company recovered from the financial damage before it became catastrophic. But the greatest change happened between Grant and Celeste. Their relationship did not become perfect overnight. There were still uncomfortable memories. There were moments when Grant struggled to trust her decisions, and Celeste understood that trust had to be earned slowly. Yet they began meeting occasionally, sometimes for coffee and sometimes when Elsie joined them after school. Celeste discovered that Elsie loved drawing buildings, while Grant discovered that Celeste secretly hated elevators and always took the stairs whenever possible. Small details replaced the painful first impression they had been forced to carry. One Saturday afternoon, Grant took Elsie to a community park where Celeste was volunteering at a children's career event organized by the company. Elsie ran toward her with a drawing she had made of a tall office building surrounded by trees. At the bottom she had written a simple sentence: "People can make mistakes and still make things better." Celeste stared at the drawing for a long moment. She realized the little girl had unknowingly captured the lesson that had taken two successful adults weeks to understand. Grant had once believed that being fired had destroyed his future. Celeste had once believed that firing him was necessary to save hers. In the end, both had been wrong about what they were losing and what they were capable of becoming. As the afternoon sun stretched across the park, Grant watched Celeste kneel beside Elsie and admire her drawing. He felt something he had not felt in years. Not certainty. Not a perfect promise. Something better. Hope. The blind date that had begun with shock had never become the love story everyone might have expected. It became something deeper first, a story about two wounded people learning that accountability could exist beside compassion, that forgiveness could be gradual, and that one terrible decision did not have to become the final chapter of anyone's life. Eventually, love grew quietly between them, not because either person forgot what had happened, but because they learned how to build something stronger from the truth. Before the afternoon ended, Grant looked at Celeste and smiled. He no longer saw only the CEO who had fired him. She no longer saw only the employee whose life had been disrupted by a corporate crisis. They saw each other as human beings who had made mistakes, carried pain, accepted responsibility, and chosen to become better. And perhaps that was the greatest second chance of all. If this story touched your heart, please leave a meaningful comment telling us what you believe is harder, asking for forgiveness or giving it when someone truly regrets hurting you. Share this story with someone who needs hope today, like this video, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey from our community. Because sometimes the person sitting across from you is not the person who ruined your life. Sometimes they are the person who will help you understand why it had to change. And sometimes, the most painful ending is simply the beginning of a better life neither of you could see coming.